Okay, let's just jump right in with a couple of big questions. What if you could give an AI a perfect, totally unforgeable memory? Or what if you could build an internet where, getting deplatformed just wasn't a thing? It sounds pretty out there, right? Well, today we're digging into a document called the AI Bitcoin Revolution, and believe me, it makes some pretty radical claims. It's all about how one specific version of Bitcoin could totally change the game for AI and solve this massive trust problem we have online. So, to really get our heads around this whole vision, we're going to break it down just like the source material does. First, we'll tackle what it calls the digital trust crisis. Then, we'll look at the specific tech solution it's pushing. After that, we dive into the cool part, giving AI a memory. Then, we'll see how this could build a whole new kind of internet. And finally, we'll see if this is all just theory or if it's actually happening out in the real world. All right, first up, the problem. So, what is the big issue this document is trying to get at? Well, it doesn't waste any time. It basically opens with this massive claim that our whole digital world, everything we do online, is built on a foundation of, well, completely broken trust.
And yeah, the source really goes for the jugular with this one. I mean, think about this quote. The point it's making is that when some payment processor can just flick a switch and shut down your business, the real cost isn't just the money you lose. No, it's way bigger than that. They call it the death of innovation itself. Why? Because who in their right mind would risk building something truly new and disruptive on a platform that could just pull the plug on them at any moment? So the document breaks this whole trust crisis down into three main problems that, let's be honest, we probably all feel. First, there's the truth problem. I mean, is that video you just saw real or is it a deep fake? It's getting impossible to tell. Then you've got the gatekeeper problem. A handful of giant companies basically own the internet, controlling what we see and say. And last but not least, the wasted time problem. Seriously, how many times this month have you had to upload your driver's license or some other ID just to prove that you are, well, you? It's endless. Okay, so after painting that pretty grim picture of the internet today, the document shifts gears and starts talking about the solution. And this is key. It's not just waving its hands and saying blockchain will fix it. No, it gets super specific. It points to one particular protocol, Bitcoin SV, or BSV, and argues that this, and only this, has the technical chops to actually fix these huge systemic problems. And this is where things get really interesting, because the argument gets technical. Look at this comparison chart from the document. The differences it's highlighting are, well, they're not small. We're talking about fees that are fractions of a penny versus fees that are $5, $10, $20 or more. We're talking about transactions settling in under a second versus waiting 10 minutes or longer. The whole point here is to position BSV not just as like a slightly better alternative, but as a fundamentally different kind of network, one that's built from the ground up for data, and tons of it. And just to really hammer home that cost argument, get this. The source claims it can be millions of times more expensive to store data on a chain like Ethereum compared to BSV. Now, that's not just about pinching pennies. The argument is that a cost difference that massive, it's a total game changer. It means you can suddenly build things that were just economically impossible before, especially things that need a ton of data, like, say, advanced AI. All right, so now we get to the part where the two big ideas in the title, AI and Bitcoin, finally come together. The document throws out a pretty provocative idea. For all their incredible power, today's AIs have a huge fundamental flaw. They have, for lack of a better term, a really bad memory. And the question it poses is simple but powerful. If an AI can't even prove what it knew and when it knew it, how are we ever supposed to really trust it? And just think about that for a second. Imagine an AI gives you some critical medical advice, but its programming, its data, it's all being updated constantly with no real record of the changes. If something goes wrong, how could you possibly prove what information the AI used to make that call? You couldn't. The document's point is that without a solid, audible memory, AI is just way too risky for anything truly important. So, how do you fix AI's memory problem? Well, the document proposes a system it calls Anchor Chain. The concept is actually pretty straightforward. You use the BSV blockchain as a kind of permanent, public hard drive for the AI. It becomes an immutable, unchangeable public record of the AI's entire learning history. Okay, so how does this Anchor Chain thing actually work? It's broken down into a pretty slick three-step process. First, anytime the AI learns something new, that piece of knowledge gets a unique digital fingerprint. That's a hash. Then you take potentially billions of these little fingerprints and organize them super efficiently into something called a Merkle tree. And finally, this is the magic part.
You take the one single fingerprint that represents that entire tree and you lock it onto the blockchain. What you're left with is amazing. One tiny, cheap transaction that gives you absolute mathematical proof of a gigantic amount of data at one specific point in time. And from here, the vision gets even bigger. It zooms out from just fixing AI's memory to, well, rethinking the entire internet. The paper argues we've been thinking about blockchain all wrong. We shouldn't see it as the place where apps live, but more like the concrete foundation, a base layer of solid truth that you can build all sorts of other things on top of.
This is where this idea of overlay networks comes into play. Just picture it. Specialized networks built for one purpose, one for social media, one for gaming, one for finance. These networks could run at lightning speed and handle insane amounts of traffic because they aren't trying to cram every single like or message onto the main blockchain. Instead, they just periodically anchor a summary of their activity, their state, back down to that base layer, the BSV chain. So they get all the speed and scale they need while still inheriting the rock-solid security of the main blockchain. I think this quote really nails the fundamental shift in thinking that the document is pushing for. The whole message is, stop thinking of Bitcoin as just money or digital gold. Start seeing it for what it really is, a communication protocol, a base layer for truthful data. It's kind of like what TCP/IP is for connecting to the internet, but this is for connecting to verifiable information.
Okay, so that's a lot of big, heady theory. But the question on everyone's mind is probably, does any of this stuff actually work in the real world? Is anyone building on it? Well, the final part of the document tries to answer that, shifting from abstract concepts to some pretty concrete examples of companies it says are doing this right now. First up, we're diving into the pretty wild world of high finance. The document points to a company called Tokenovate. Apparently, they're working with ISDA, and these are the folks who set the rules for the entire global derivatives market. We're talking trillions and trillions of dollars. The goal? To take all those dense, complicated legal contracts and turn them into smart contracts on the blockchain. And the claim is that because the costs are so ridiculously low, they could automate huge chunks of this massive market. Next, let's talk about the creator world, specifically music. The document brings up something called Sonic AI. Now, the idea here is pretty cool. They use AI to put a totally invisible watermark into audio files. Why? So they can track every single time a song gets played, anywhere on the internet. And every time it does, bing, a tiny payment, a micropayment, gets sent automatically and instantly to everyone who owns a piece of it. The artists, the songwriters, maybe even fans who own a tiny fraction of the song. And finally, it takes a swing at the big one, social media. The example given is TreeChap, and it's all about flipping the current model on its head. Right now, a giant corporation owns your data, your posts, your connections. In the model they're proposing, it's a peer-to-peer system. You would own your content. You would own your social network. And instead of your attention being sold to the highest bidder, you'd actually get paid for the value you bring to the network. And so the whole document wraps up by leaving its readers with this really powerful question. It's framing this whole thing not just as some new tech or a business plan, but as a fundamental choice. A choice about the kind of future we want to build. Do we want one that's more truthful, more transparent, and where we, the users, are actually in control? It is a huge vision for sure, and it definitely gives you a lot to chew on.